Welcome. You are at the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm an addict and an alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you.
Yes, and I'm LouiLou. My pronouns are he and him. I'm recovered for crystal meth and alcohol, and I am always in search of balance. And each week, we strive to foster a brave space where we can engage in conversations centered around topics of recovery.
And our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
Yes, but before we do that, please like, share, and comment on this episode.
Comment, ding
And
that
rate
bell.
it. Rate it.
Subscribe.
Yeah, ding that bell.
You do rate it, but y'all know what I say about rating us. Only rate us if you're going to rate us 5 stars. Otherwise, keep that shit to
Does
yourself.
that background music sound like we're at the club?
It sounds like it's going on for too long.
I know,
is what
exactly.
it's what it sounds like. And now the disclaimer: the thoughts, opinions, and views expressed on At the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we're just a couple of friends behind a mic here to entertain you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Louis, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Do you know what I'm doing tonight? I'm going to go see A Strange Loop with a bunch of like black men's. It's like we're going to go and
A
sell
strange loop.
A Strange Loop. Are you cutting off my mic?
Yeah.
The producer's like, all of a sudden I couldn't hear myself.
Like, I am over this shit.
I know, exactly. It's like, I'm all, hello. It's like, you still haven't gotten paid for this episode. I'm kidding. No, actually, and then he gets paid in good wishes.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service. Anyway.
So you're going to go to see the show?
Yeah, and if you don't know, it's Tony Award-winning. I don't know a lot about it, but I've been making up stuff like when people ask me, come on, stop asking questions.
You're like, it's Tony Award-winning.
You're supposed to know. And how are you?
I'm okay. I just got back from Nevada City, which is one of my favorite places.
And tell me, what is it, again, because I think I asked before,
what is Nevada City?
What the hell happens there?
So Nevada City is a small town. It's an old, it was part of the gold rush.
Do you guys wear cowboy outfits and
No.
Okay.
No, this is, am I updating you on what happened or? So we went to Nevada City. So it's a small town. It's very quaint, very cute. It's surrounded by greenery. There's a lot of trees and rivers and lakes and stuff like that. It's quite beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. But it was a fun trip. It was, like I was telling you before we started, it was my partner and I, we bumped heads a little bit at the very beginning because he and I are very different travelers. Like I showed up with a backpack and a suitcase. My backpack had like just regular backpacky things. And he showed up with 3 bags and a suitcase. But the thing is that he showed up with food and drinks and clothes and sunblock and bug spray. And
he sounds like Steven.
Steven's
is
that how you travel, Steven?
But no, when we were in Hawaii, Steven was he had everything.
Yeah, I can survive on very little.
His bags reminded me of my mom's purse. My mom used to be able to pull out everything. It's like, you need a toothbrush? What do you need? It's like, I got you. It's
it was a lot like that. It was a lot like that. So that was our trip. It was very nice. And we got back yesterday and I'm very tired.
Oh, well, right on.
Yeah, thank you. And so we have a guest on today. Our guest name is DK. And DK has chosen to remain anonymous to the extent that one can remain anonymous.
And we respect that.
But today's topic is pathways to redemption, navigating the criminal justice system in recovery. And
I love it with anonymous. It's that's like share.
Pathways
anonymous.
to navigating recovery. And so this is our last guest for this particular series.
And for the season.
Yeah, that's right. For the season. I was going to say that. Did you want to?
Oh.
No, I mean, go ahead. I mean, I don't want to take that from you.
Go ahead.
So it's our last episode for the season.
So he can take a break. So it's because she's gotten so sassy.
But we'll be off for a month, and that's when we do our strategic planning, and then we'll be back June 5th. So June 5th is a Wednesday, so we're going to be moving from a Tuesday slot to a Wednesday slot, and we'll be airing at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Are you excited about that? I'm excited.
I am very excited about that.
Because that means that more of you who are not able to catch us may have an opportunity to catch us and participate in our live conversations, or join us as guest co-hosts in the studio.
That's right.
In the studio.
Yeah, that's right. So DK, we have, so we want to jump in. So we're going to ask you 3 questions, actually 2 questions, that we ask all of our guests, and you have 3 minutes to answer those questions. Can you hear me, DK?
Yep, I can hear you.
All right, perfect.
Well, great. I'm going to start off.
Okay.
DK, what brought you to recovery? What made you choose recovery?
The criminal justice system.
Ah,
Yeah, my experience with the criminal justice system was once I got out of prison, I was on 3 years supervised release, which means if I got into any kind of trouble or tested dirty in the first 3 years, I was going to go back to prison. So there was a lot of motivation there to figure out how to stay clean and not reoffend.
Yeah. Okay, I want to come back to that. That's very rich. And then our last question that we ask all of our guests is, do you have a relationship with a higher power? And if so, what is that relationship?
I do. It's not the traditional higher power that a lot of people envision when you hear the word God in any type of 12-step fellowship. It's more of, and I have different ones depending on the situation. So, if it's a moral situation, I try to rely on my conscience, which was a voice that I feel like I always had. It's just that it was always drowned out by the noise of my disease. Sometimes my higher power is the group or the fellowship, their collective experience going through a lot of different things that I have no experience with. So it's more of a pragmatic / practical type of higher power versus I don't really have a higher power that's like a God that I think loves me and cares for me and wants the best for me. I have not yet to find that type of higher power in my life.
Nice. Thank you. All right, so let's jump in. So what's happened? So over the last few weeks in all of our conversations, one of the themes has been that generally, criminal behavior didn't come out of like thin air, right? Like either it was modeled, or there were like environmental circumstances that allowed for criminal behavior to become part of a person's narrative, right? So can you tell us a little bit about like, what was your early childhood like?
Yeah, so I just grew up in a lower middle class family in San Francisco, in the heart of the city. And, both my parents worked. So I was one of those latchkey kids. I came home from school and I was home by myself, a lot of free time. My father was an alcoholic. My mother identifies as an alcoholic, and my brother has identified as an addict. So it was rampant in our household. So the typical dysfunction that you would find in behaviorally in an alcoholic household was my experience. But I didn't grow up in the neighborhoods. I didn't grow up with gangs. I went to school, did well. I went to college, and I had a career, a corporate career. So how I got involved with the criminal justice system is just, I guess you could say, dumb luck.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to this idea of dumb luck. So would you say like what bearing, if any, did having alcoholic parents and say a brother that was an addict, what bearing did that have on you?
So my brother's experience, he meandered through what was eventually defined as gang activity. And why I say it that way is, I remember watching his story unfold. It was him and a bunch of friends, and they used to, they went to school together, and they just got caught up, and they ended up getting into different beefs with other groups of friends, and eventually, San Francisco Police Department defined them as a gang because by definition they were. So I had noticed that a lot of the involvement in crime just happens, as a result of escalating circumstances. And I hung out with friends, we used to just hang out, in my buddy's garage, drinking or doing whatever, or going to bars and stuff. And sometimes, fights would break out or some kind of beef would arise, and it would turn into like this thing, right? Us versus them. So I always kind of sat in this space where it was like, you could define some of, I mean, we were doing things that were illegal. You're getting into fights, or you're getting into, like, just buying drugs off the street is technically illegal. So you're already kind of got one foot in. But when you do it with your friends, it becomes quote unquote organized, and eventually, before you know it, you're caught up in the situation where, if the law enforcement looks at you, you're part of a gang or an organization.
Right.
But it never started out like, there were Norteños on the corner and I wanted to be like them. It wasn't like that at all.
No. Okay. And then can you say more, like, what was your relationship like with your parents?
It was almost like just parents. Like, they were my parents. I loved them on some level, but I don't really think that in my head, like, I looked up to my father or I looked up to my mother. And I wanted mostly, I think, my father's approval, simply because the way that he raised us was through negative reinforcement. Nothing that I ever did was good enough. And so every time I brought home a report card or I did something, it wasn't good enough. So it was more like I wasn't really looking for his approval because I wanted him to love me. I just wanted him to not be mad at me.
Right. Right. Go ahead.
No, yeah. So that's kind of, I mean, my father died of esophageal cancer, which is typically associated with drinking and smoking. And he was in his late 50s when that happened. And that happened in the late 90s. So I have not really had an opportunity as an adult since I got clean to really work on that relationship. And I have a relationship with my mother now, and so, I've done what I can in recovery to have a functioning relationship with my family.
Okay. And you said, so let's go back to this idea of dumb luck. Can you say more about what you mean when you say dumb luck?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you walk into meetings and you're like, it's jails, institutions, and death, right? Like, I never thought my story would be jail. So, like, I went to school, I got really good grades, I went to college, I graduated, I worked in a corporation. I started out as a clerk while I was going to college, and they gave me an opportunity, and 10 years later I'm a corporate vice president, and this was in my late 20s, but the disease was always there, and it was manifesting, and it was growing, and it got to the point where one of the ways that my addiction manifests is I just can't manage my finances. I bought, I was making a lot of money, yet I was always broke. And then the way that I used and the way that I wanted to use was expensive. Yeah. So, I had to start getting into things, into criminal activity, which I can get into the details of that, in order to maintain my habit.
So your criminal behavior was circumstantial. It's like is as a result of like trying to kind of prolong or really kind of support your addiction.
My habit.
Your habit.
Yeah. I mean, so there was that, but there was also this other thing, right? Like, so I used to get teased a lot in school, beat up in school, made fun of in school, right? And so what I realized is that if you used, drank, or partied, quote, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, you were a little bit less, you were a little more cool if you did that.
Right.
And then I realized that if you had a connect that could get stuff, then you were even cooler.
That was that's always.
If you were the connect, if you were the connect and the cook, then you could control the universe. And so it's that arc that I kind of see. It was the ego feeding. All of that is an ego feeding exercise. And I learned that that's what fueled me. Was it fed my ego, it fed my disease, like literally fed my disease, and made me feel a little bit more empowered and kind of in control of my using.
So when did the using escalate and the criminal behavior escalate at the same time?
Yeah. So I was trying to use and go to work at the same time, and I couldn't do that. So I quit my job, and I just, at this point, my brother had already been to treatment and my father had already died. So I knew that I had a problem, but I just didn't know how to fix it. So it was so stressful trying to control using that I was like, forget it. I'm just going to use every day and ride this horse until the end, whatever that looked like. So I I quit the job and I started using all the time.
Okay.
And in order to do that, like I met people, I met a lot of dealers, I got connected with them, and then I got connected with people who cooked. I got connected with them. I watched what they did, and I kept leapfrogging, figuring if I could cook, then I could cut out and keep going and on and on and on. And that's kind of how the drug dealing and the manufacturing escalated.
So for listeners who may not be familiar with the term cook, what does cook mean?
Okay, so let me actually, for those who do know what cook means, let me also be very clear. So in the older days of methamphetamine use, you could literally buy all the ingredients on the street, and you could sit and you could take all of these toxic chemicals you can buy on the street, and you can turn it into crystal methamphetamine. So I did not always do that. I knew people who did. Then there's a secondary process when you buy methamphetamine off the street that's usually been cut down with things so that you can make a higher profit. There's a process to turn, we used to call it old school crank. There's a process that you can take crank and turn it into crystal. And that's what I knew how to do. So you could buy, so I was it was like the end process of cooking, not the origin process of cooking.
Oh, interesting.
And so that's what I learned how to do. Yeah.
Interesting.
No. I was listening. I'm nodding and agreeing because at one point you said, I was thinking about how my mind worked, and that, well, if I do this, then I can do this, and then I was just kind of nodding in agreement.
Okay.
Yes. So it's and then being around people who could cook. So once you get to that level, you can make you can make PCP, you can, down in South America they make cocaine from leaves. So methamphetamine, you can make it from a lot of different chemicals, and so that's what cooking is about. So you are the manufacturer of the drug. You are the
right, and I imagine
Pfizer.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of power in that. So at what point, I guess, like what were the things that were happening right before things started to escalate where there were legal penalties? Like what was happening right before that started to escalate?
Okay, so here's the abbreviated version, right? So I am doing all of this cooking, and when you control the ability to the process that I was involved in allowed me to control the quality of the drugs that I was selling. And so I had a theory. So the stuff that I was making was good, right? And I don't want to get into the details of it, right? So my sales were going through the roof, which means I had to buy more and more base product from larger and larger drug dealers. So I kept moving up the food chain, finding people who were deeper and deeper into drug dealing. Now, the weird thing is that I ran into a high-level dealer who happened to work with my brother way back in the day. And he recognized me because I look like my brother. We had the same last name. And he had once been at my house when I was doing some other stuff. So he had known me. So when he saw me, he kind of helped, I don't say take me under his wing, but we became friends, and he helped protect me as best he could, because I was getting into really, really, really dangerous territory. Because now I'm hanging out in the projects. I'm aligned with gangs, and so he was there to sort of do the best that he can to keep me from getting myself killed. Concurrently with that, I was running out of money, because that's just how it happens. So I started counterfeiting. When you do crystal meth, you have a lot of free time on your hands and you're not sleeping. And I was really good with computers. So I started counterfeiting with the intention of using a lot of that. What we did with a lot of that was we used it to buy drugs from drug dealers. We used it to rip off other drug dealers. And because the thing about it was as angry as other drug dealers would get that we used fake money with them, it wasn't a total loss because they just passed it on to the next guy and the next guy. So that's where I got to this particular point where we were counterfeiting tens of thousands of dollars a week, and we were producing pounds of meth. And it just got so chaotic and so out of control that the first time I got in trouble was another drug dealer was using the counterfeit money at a hotel and then stayed in the room that he paid for with it. So the golden rule is if you're going to use counterfeit money, don't stay in the location where you use it. And he did. So the clerk at the hotel called the police. They kicked in his door. They caught him trying to flush it down the toilet, and he snitched on me to the Secret Service. And that's how I got busted for the counterfeiting.
Oh, wow. And was that the first moment when you got in trouble with the law?
Yeah, it was was that the first one? Yeah.
Okay. So then what were the consequences that followed that? And was that the defining moment where there was a turn in behavior, or did...
Oh, no.
Okay. So tell us.
It was just the beginning. I was thinking it's like, was that the last time? Because it's like some of our listeners would think, well, that's enough.
Yeah.
I'm good.
So that wasn't the last time. Can you tell us what followed?
So I continued to do what I was doing, and I was still in my apartment, because as you know, in San Francisco, it's almost impossible to kick somebody out who hasn't paid their rent. And I was going through, actually, that's how the Secret Service found me. I was not paying my rent. I was being evicted. I walked into court for my eviction hearing, and the Secret Service were waiting for me, and they arrested me on the spot. So, but prior to that, they had executed a search warrant on my apartment, and so I knew they were looking for me. And then the eviction hearing, and they arrested me. I got arraigned, and they kicked me loose because it was my first offense. Then, some months down the road after that, somebody's mother snitched on me because their daughter was getting the drugs from me. So now SFPD was looking for me, and I knew that. Yeah, so they came, and actually, this friend of mine that I talked about that had kind of was providing cover for me, he found out that SFPD was going to do what's called a knock and talk. They're going to come knock on your door just to talk with you, but if you let them in or they think they see something, they can now come in and search your apartment without a warrant. And I knew the week that they were coming to my apartment, so I had been kept that clear. Well, they came 2 days after that window had closed, and I had just finished cooking. And so they came into the apartment when I wasn't there, and they found all this stuff. And so now SFPD is looking for me. But during that search warrant, because my neighbors in the building, after 2 search warrants, anytime anybody went near that apartment, they called the cops. So that's the beginning when I was homeless. So I had been arrested by the federal government. I had the SFPD looking for me, and I had no place to live. And so that is how I got everything caught up with. That's the extent of my legal issues.
Mm-hmm.
I did get arrested on the street, like trying to use counterfeit currency at like an Office Depot. They arrested me, and then they cut me loose after a day, but and dropped the charges. But that was sort of the beginning of. So if you want to know what turned it around, so I'm fighting these 2 cases. I'm fighting it in federal court. I'm fighting it in state court. So everything is coming to a resolution where I'm going to plead guilty to 1 felony with the state, 1 felony with the feds, and they're going to combine everything, and the feds are going to lock me up. And I'm about 30 days away from my final court date, and I'm walking on the street homeless, and I'm like, this is it. I have proven to myself that I cannot drink or use successfully. And every decision that I made that I thought was smart this entire journey, here I am standing on the street with a backpack, and that's it. So I told myself, once they lock me up, that's it. The party is absolutely over. And so I tell that because that was sort of like a first step thing in the 12-step program without even me being familiar with 12-step, was this surrender to the idea that no matter what, I just couldn't drink or use anymore because I had proven that when I do that, it wins every time, and this is where I end up. And I was still lucky to be alive. But keep in mind, I had guns in my faces, I had knives in my face, I had been beaten up in a hotel with a motorcycle helmet, left for dead. I had cuts everywhere, I had scars. So the ride was pretty rough getting to that moment, and that was where I made that kind of decision or agreement with myself. And a month later, I got sentenced. And on the bus ride out to be locked up, that was when the relief came over that it was going to be over. Not knowing what it was going to take, after I got out of prison, but at least the disaster of this 3 years from quitting my job to being locked up, including a 9-month run of being homeless, was finally over.
Right. So it was like something outside of yourself was putting a stop to everything. And does it seem, at least in the way that I'm listening to it, does it feel like, were it not for that this would have kind of continued to the bitter end?
Yeah, I probably would have gotten myself killed with with these gangs, or if I had never picked up crystal meth, I believe that I would have drank the way that my father did, because I was someone who didn't get a lot of hangovers. I was drinking like he was. My father went to work every day. He was, he drank and went to work, and I was doing that. And I really feel like I would have continued on that slow burn. And I'm the age that I'm almost a year or two within the age from when he died. So I would probably be near the end if I had continued on that path as well. So yeah.
So from your perspective now, it seems as though the criminal justice system and you becoming a part of it is what kind of saved you, or was the catalyst, no?
Yeah, it put the brakes on everything for me. I was actually talking to a family member today some family members who have another family member who has been drinking, and it's like, I am not somebody who can just put it down and walk into a meeting and say I'm done. Like, I applaud everybody who has strength, because that was offered to me, while I was on probation pre-trial. I was like, I can't, I was offered halfway house, a bed, and 3 meals before I got locked up, and I refused to do it because I couldn't stop, and so I needed to be locked up to put the brakes on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked to other people before. It's like, and it seems as though a part of the addiction is all of the stuff that you were doing too. Like, it wasn't just the getting high, but it was, the sneaking around, all of that other, stuff behind in the shadows. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, I grew up watching Scarface, the movie. I love that movie, right? There is an attraction to that whole criminal element, or just, and the thing for me was, because I was doing everything I could to be good in school and do all that stuff for my father. Like, it was just this complete opposite relief where I could just do whatever the hell I wanted without a care. And, being in that situation, before it all starts to fall apart, it's a very powerful situation. You can make people do anything you want them to do if you want to go that route. And, you're worshipped. It's the Dune thing. He who controls the spice controls the universe. It's so true.
It's true. Right.
The other thing, and it's not lost on me that all of this happened in a 3-year period. That was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I missed that part. Go ahead.
Yeah. That's how I use, and that's how fast I excel. It's like, yeah, just go for it.
Yeah, one of the thing, Brandon just left a comment, and he was saying, thankfully that you got that nudge from the judge, as they say.
The other thing I'll tell you about my judge is still a judge, and I see him. His brother is actually retired Supreme Court Justice Breyer. Mm-hmm. And when I was sentenced, the amazing thing about the legal system is they know addicts better than we know ourselves. Like, my Judge Breyer made a little bit of speech. He felt that, I had a drug problem, and that if I could get that under control, I could return to being a contributing member of the community or something like that. So they see us all the time. So they are very aware of, it's very hard to lie to them. And so they knew exactly, and they gave me a break because I had been a record of employment, paying my taxes, having bank accounts. So my pretrial was like, we just think that if he gets his drug problem under control, he'll be fine. There are other people who have never, ever held a job. They've been in the gang since they were kids, and they have a much higher hurdle to overcome than I did, for sure.
I see. And I appreciate you, contextualizing that. Essentially what you're talking about are like the different doors that are opened for a person when they have resources available to them.
Yeah. Exactly.
I have one question before we kind of like talk about like where things really started to turn, is that I was just really struck by the consequences you kind of like glossed over. You talked about like having guns in your face and knives in your face and having been beat and like left for dead. There's something really striking about that. And I think specifically what I'm thinking about is despite having had those experiences, you continue to do what you were doing. Like can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the denial system, right?
Okay.
Like, there's the denial system. When you work step one through the NA program, denial has its own section. It's strong and it is alive and it's one. And the disease, I felt like I had, what else am I going to do? I just need to keep going. And it's always like the next deal, the next day, things will be better. I'll get out of it tomorrow or something like that. And there's this other code that gets sold to you, right? It's the life in the game. I got involved in that and I made bad decisions. And these are the results of those decisions. It's part of the lifestyle that I chose to get into, right? So there is sort of this badge of honor crap that goes with getting involved with that. With that entire
Yeah,
stuff,
it was like
the game,
right? It was like the price of admissions. It was like this was your life,
but also not knowing like what it looks like on the outside or what's on the other side for you. Like as much as like now we can talk about 12-step and other things. Like when you're in it, not knowing that there is another way, and so I guess if I'm in it, I might as well be in it.
yeah, I hear that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the bar just drops so low for what an existence is. Like, just go down to the Tenderloin, right? Like, I've been doing a lot of traveling to the Tenderloin for various reasons, and the bar is so low for what an existence is, and I can see how that happens, right? Like, you listen to the arc and you say in 3 years all that happens, right? But when you're in it, the bar is just falling.
Yeah.
The bar and the floor is just falling, and you just like, this is just the ride.
Yeah,
Something that you, DK, like. Really interesting. When you're in it, like you said, you're in it. Everything else, like I always thought that as soon as I got sober, all of a sudden I started vibrating at a different frequency. And folks, I could find myself walking around and folks that I knew from before would walk past me not knowing that I would, whatever the situation was, how they say we change. Yeah.
So at what
Yeah.
At what point did things start to change for you? So after the nudge from the judge, how did life start to change for you? Like, where did it begin?
Well, yeah. I mean, I got really, really lucky, right? So I got sentenced to federal prison a year and a day. And so my state charges were handed over to the federal government. And by agreeing to one count with the state on possession with the intent to distribute, their deal was we'll let the feds handle your incarceration, which means I didn't have to go to San Quentin or state prison. I was going to go to federal prison. And the feds were like, if you plead to one count, then we won't federalize your drug charge, because if we do that, the mandatory minimum is now 3 years. So I went away and I did my time in a relatively safe prison. I went to a prison where, I mean, I can get into it, but it's not a high security prison. So everybody is going home. Nobody is doing life. So that means that nobody is trying to add to their sentence, right? Mm-hmm. They're not going to shank you or kill you because you're the wrong color, because they have nothing to lose. Everybody there has something to lose. And as long as you don't snitch or get into any kind of stuff over there, you would be fine, which is what I did. So, when I got out, I was sentenced to 3 years of supervised release, which was drug testing and just probation, monitoring my movement. And again, because it's the federal government, they have way more resources than the state. So, the structure was consistent. Let me put it to you that way, right? Like when they tell you this is what you have to do, like when I had to leave the county, San Francisco County, I had to call them and let them know. I also had a job at some point in LA County, and I was able to make that move because they could transfer my supervised release from Northern California to Southern California. So the federal government's reach and abilities and resources is so great that it's a really good structured program. As long as you do what they ask you to do, you're going to be okay.
Right. And
But the
so,
thing,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so they ordered me, court ordered the first year to go to meetings, and I did that, and I got one of those court cards signed. But I was one of those people that just did not want to deal with 12-step as it was presented, because it just seemed cultish, the God thing, all that stuff that I wanted to give it a go on my own. And so, the 3 years was easy. Actually, my brother visited me in prison. He said, it's easy to do the 3 years because when you know what the consequences are, it's easy to not break the rules. It's when, and I think this is true for a lot of people in the room, because I talk about it with the people, my peers, when you're not in a structured environment where you don't know the consequences of your own behavior, it's not definitive. Dean, if you get caught stealing, we're going to lock you up for 6 months. Dean, if you test dirty, we're going to lock you up for 6 months. Out in the real world, it's like, oh, well, if I use and I don't get caught, what are the consequences? It's in that kind of vacuum where there is no direct consequence for my behavior that things can go sideways really fast. And my brother warned me about that. He said, so I was really acutely aware that once I completed my supervised release with the government, and that's when things were going to be a little bit more challenging for me, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. And DK, we have a comment that just came in. Let's see the comment. Jaylon writes, did you ever have problems taking suggestions from people in program who couldn't relate to your story nor had your background? And that's for you, DK.
Okay, so let's get into some specifics, right? So eventually I meandered my way into 12-step, right? There's a story there, and because I wandered into San Francisco, NA, right? Which, and my sponsors from there, and things were doing, I was doing what I was supposed to do. But I got connected with San Francisco's Crystal Meth Anonymous through a friend, because that was my drug of choice. And I got involved there for a variety of reasons. But to address Jaylon's question, so here's the thing. I don't know if you know this about San Francisco CMA, but it's primarily a gay fellowship, and I'm straight. And when I got in there, it was the best thing that could have happened for me, because two things. One, that it removed all of the distractions that were happening to me in straight NA. There were no women there to sort of, to alter my motives for anything that I was doing. There were no other straight men there to compete with as the alpha male in the room. And there was nobody in there still acting like we were on the street, which was the lifestyle I was trying to leave behind. And what I learned in NA is what carried me over into CMA, right? It's like a lot of the men in CMA used differently than I did. They didn't have guns in their faces. They weren't doing the things that I were doing. So a lot of the stories that they were telling me of what it was like for them was nothing like what it was like for me. But the feelings were the same. The shame, the embarrassment, the guilt. And then in recovery, it was the same way. Like I could relate to the feelings of, the rewards of good behavior, redemption, patching up relationships. So in general, I would say that, the majority of my time, and I was in Crystal Meth Anonymous, like that was my primary fellowship, like 80% of my recovery, 90% of my recovery, at some point, 100% of my recovery was in CMA. That I learned that you don't have to use the way that I use or live the way that I live in order for me to find ways to be able to relate to you. And so the suggestions address feelings and spirituality. They're universal. And so I learned to be able to look for similarities through that experience. I hope that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. So we have 5 minutes to kind of land a plane, and then we're going to go to our podcast exclusive content. So I want to come back to, I want to hear more about like what life is like now for you. And I'm waiting for Steven to hold on. We're going to start. Yeah, because we're going to do the last 5. Yeah. What's that? Hold on. Here we go. So basically, let me just repeat what I'm saying. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna wrap up this on air section, and then we're gonna start recording the podcast exclusive content. So for people who might be listening to us for the first time, we film on air. We have part of our conversation here, and then the last 15 minutes we take off air, which you can then listen to wherever you listen to podcasts. So with that being said,
The Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
we provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support.
You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast.
And tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have you ever played freeze tag?
Yeah.
Okay, it's that moment while we're waiting for this to end. That's like, hold on, stay still. Don't say anything. Don't breathe.
It does feel that way.
So DK, how was that for you?
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
How was that for you?
Well, that was fun. going down memory lane.
Yeah.
This month has been humbling for me because normally I talk a lot, but I've been able to kind of just sit back and kind of soak it in, and I really appreciate that. I think
That was certainly my experience. Like, especially today, I'm really captivated by your story, and I think part of that for me is related to just like how coherent it is, and you seem very grounded in your narrative, which is very encouraging. And I imagine that for people listening who may be kind of still struggling or trying to like find a way out, they may have found some hope in your narrative.
Hey, can I ask you? Okay, so you know that point when you were no longer beholden to like the system, like after you were done with that commitment, kind of the thing that your brother talked about. So were you already in by that time, or was there ever like a moment where you wavered, where you were ready to kind of like say, because in this month we've talked to folks, and some have talked about how, oh yeah, I got another struggle at that point. So where were you?
You mean with picking up again? Kind
Well,
of thing?
yeah, it's like whether or not to, because sometimes that lure, the pull of that life, because what we don't talk about a lot is that you do need to grieve that sometimes because.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in here before you say anything, one of the things that I've learned from all the guests that we have on was, and I didn't know this, or maybe not to the extent that I know it now, is that that there is a draw, that there's a pull, that like the fast money is really kind of intoxicating and draws people in, that like the lifestyle draws people in, that, Louis gestured toward this during our conversation earlier, which is that there was like, there was just something like what comes up for me is like, I just think about, you're essentially kind of like living in a movie, if you're, like where things are just so fast. So that's like striking to me that's been a theme throughout all of the conversations we had, is that there's this other thing going on for a lot of people.
Well, I mean, yeah. So I constantly say it in the rooms that I have an affinity for just not only recovering addicts but recovering drug dealers, because leaving that lifestyle behind. So to explain it, like when I was first out of prison, I was, and I had made that decision that I wasn't going to use anymore, right? Like I was lonely. I had no friends. I made a commitment not to connect with any of my old friends because I knew that was going to be a disaster. Playmates and playgrounds kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I was broke. I was working full time and I was hungry all the time because I couldn't afford food. So the idea that, hey, if I cook and flip some, sold some dope but didn't use, I could make my money problems go away instantly. And that thought always crept into my head. But I shut it down immediately because I knew that was a lie. And when you're lonely, if you show up someplace with a with drugs, you can have a lot of friends really
Yeah,
fast.
that's real.
And it's crap. You know it's a lie, but at least in the moment you're not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's real.
I switched it to food when I show up with treats. Or actually, in 12-step, if I show up with a cake, because we're all fat bitches.
Yeah. We're like, oh, yeah. So can you talk a little bit about like what your life is like now?
Yeah, so the best way to describe it is that when I got out of prison and I wasn't working 12 step and I had, I was like, okay, you're really lonely, you have no friends. I don't know how to make friends because all the friends that I made, I used to make at the bar, at the club, at the pool hall, right? And those areas are off limits. I've got no money. I can't date because I can't even afford food for myself. And so I told myself, I said, look, if your rest of your life you work an hourly job instead of my corporate career job, if I work, a regular hourly job and I live paycheck to paycheck, I live in this one bedroom, this tiny studio, and I never have a girlfriend again, and I never buy a house, and I never own a car. I take muni the rest of my life. That's the life that I'm going to have to have. And the deal was like, you did this to yourself. I did that to myself. And so if that's the price I have to pay now to not go back to, going back to that world and possibly and most likely getting myself killed, this is it. So that was sort of another surrender thing, which helped me once I got into the rooms because I had already made a commitment to myself prior to getting locked up that I wasn't going to use anymore. And then I told myself, look, this is the life that I created for myself. You need to deal with it and accept it because this is just how it might be. Today, I have friends. I have a job, a good paying job. I'm married. I own a home and I own a car. So my message is that what we say in recovery or 12 step is literally the truth. Don't put anything you put in front of your recovery, you're going to lose. I put nothing in front of my recovery. I put it all, I just said that none of it was going to happen ever again. And as a result of putting everything I had into recovery, I've gotten the very things that I said that I was not going to chase anymore.
That's
So
really,
that's the best message that I can. That's just really what happened.
yeah, and that's quite beautiful. I mean, what you're making me think of, and I think I'm wondering if this is what Lewis was getting at a little earlier, is like I'm thinking about one person in particular, and so I'm wondering how this applies to you, which is, when a judge isn't nudging you, when there's no one watching,
Yeah, when the circumstance is not as
dire,
clean as you said with the federal, where they were like, because in a lot of cases you don't get the support, or even if you are getting the support, it doesn't feel like support.
Yeah,
because of wherever you are and your understanding of it.
Yeah, and what I heard you say was that you got to this place where you just, I mean, I hate to use this term, but like there was a radical acceptance about like what life was supposed to look like.
I love when people say, I hate to use this term, and then they use it. ML. But
is that what you
like
came on?
No, but I like.
Well, I don't. The reason why I don't. I guess the reason why I don't. Lewis just made this about him. But what I'm thinking about here.
It's like I'm consistent, if nothing else.
The reason why I don't want to use radical acceptance is because it's loaded, right? But essentially, what you were describing reminded me of that. And so, to my question, my question here is like, what keeps you going when no one is watching, right? Like you don't have the judge at your back. Like you have the resources, and you're grounded in your recovery. So what keeps that going for you?
Yeah, so what it keeps it going. So in early recovery, and this actually has to do with my service in CMA, which is why I'm so grateful for CMA, is that in the early days I was asked to do some service to help the district, become organized. And our decision making, all the conversations that we had, the chair always said, how is this going to help the addict who still suffers? Because if it's not going to help the addict who still suffers, we're not going to do it. And when I was going to NA early on, when you go to their convention, there's a fourth tradition statement that they read before every meeting that says, if our public reputation is damaged, addicts may die. So And then again, being in CMA and not being lured by having ulterior motives by all of the distractions that a guy like me would have in the straight meetings. I did a lot of service simply because of that message, that we're trying to carry a message and we're trying to save people's lives. We're trying to give people the opportunity to be clean, even if just for a day. And so that was drilled into my head for like the first 3 years of the service that I did in that in the fellowship. And so every time I get distracted, I still go to 4 meetings a week, and I try to stay focused on the idea that we're here to save lives and give people a break, and that's what keeps me going. And I've talked about it before, like I would do service for 6 months on Unity Day, and it could be really difficult and it's a ton of work. But I know that in that moment, when the Unity Day comes on, there's going to be one person at Unity Day who's going to say something that's going to make all 6 months worth of work worth it. And the last time I did it, I got to go to 20 minutes of a meeting. I got to a meeting late. I sat down, and this woman was sharing, and she was in tears. She said, "This has been the best day of my recovery because we don't have CMA where I live. Nobody understands me, and this has been the best day." And she's crying. And I was like, that's all I needed to hear. That's it. I got up and I left it.
Exactly.
I feel that way too about
I just got chills.
Yeah, I love that so much. I feel very. So what I'm trying to say here is that one of the things that I love to hear at meetings is like, I love when someone shares about like feeling crazy and feeling unstable, or like having issues with like suicidal ideation. Like when I hear those things from either the floor or from, the person who's secretarying the meeting, there's just something about that like it takes the sting out of all of it, So I can certainly relate to, it all being worth it.
Oh yeah.
So if Louis doesn't have any final thoughts, I don't have any final, I think we can land this plane. Do you have anything else that you want to share with us before we go?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that the unique situation, why I wanted to not be on camera, is that I have found that people are very forgiving, but organizations are not.
Yeah.
So I have cleared up my record to the best that I can, but it is still there. Federal felonies never come off your record. And there is a bit of a challenge when it comes to being employed, especially there's a 7-year rule, in early recovery, trying to get a job with a criminal record and having probation come to your office or your workplace and checking up on you. It can be really, really difficult. And there are predatory employers out there who will take advantage of felons because they know they need to get a job and they can screw around with them. So it is not, there is this extra burden, but I have watched a lot of people who have criminal records. It can be done. And yeah, it's unfair that there's this extra burden that we have to deal with. But that's a consequence of the way that I use and other people use. And so, but the thing is that it can be navigated, and it does get better over time. It's the one thing that I want to tell anybody who's either staring at the possibility of a felony conviction or has one and is struggling with it. I acknowledge that challenge. I know it's there, but just keep persevering, and you can usually punch through.
That's excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been really great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
All right,
Sorry
take good
for the
care.
Confusion earlier.
It's totally okay.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Sure.